It seems we're not a good match. You don't need to come in from tomorrow." I had reached my limit too. I couldn't keep up with a boss like her. I responded right then and there. "Understood. I'll resign today. Thank you for everything, even though it was a short time." With that, I decided to leave the job I loved so much. As I was going for my busy days, a new secretary came to tell me I had a visitor. Wondering who it was, I headed to the reception room and saw Mrs. Johnson, the president, there. "John, as you can see, would you come back to our company?" As soon as she saw me, Mrs. Johnson said hi politely. The once high-handed Mrs. Johnson was nowhere to be seen. "My name is John. I've been working at a clothing store for traditional clothes in a small town in Nebraska for 20 years. Recently, there are fewer customers for traditional clothes, so we also deal with suits, shirts, and even take orders for school uniforms to keep going. I have no complaints about this company. In fact, I'm fond of how it's rooted in and values the local community." Dark clouds loomed over the company when the former president, who had been running the company, fell. He had started the store when he was young, but his health had been declining recently, and he eventually couldn't even make it to the store. Then, his granddaughter, with no experience in this line of work, Mrs. Johnson Emily, took over as president. Although she was briefed on the takeover, her way of dealing with people was just awful. I was particularly targeted by Mrs. Johnson. "John, how's sales going recently? I'd like you to close some new deals soon." Mrs. Johnson asked me in a displeased tone. "Yes, I've been making new rounds, but there are hardly any individual customers willing to order traditional clothes." It may sound like an excuse, but the declining interest in traditional clothes year by year is a fact. The diminishing prospects of our traditional clothing store were also a reality. However, Mrs. Johnson relentlessly blamed me. "I don't want to hear such excuses. It's not that we can't get contracts. We just haven't tried enough. You need to do more than just visit our regular customers. You need to cultivate new ones." With that, Mrs. Johnson let out an exaggerated sigh. "Don't think you can stay here forever. Increase your time outside. Don't come back until you get a contract." Mrs. Johnson stood up, grabbing her designer bag. A fancy bag and a well-tailored suit. Mrs. Johnson, being the face of the company, her going to spas and saunas during work hours was losing her the employees' trust. "Taking a break. I have a meeting this afternoon about the uniforms we supply, so I need you to be back by 3. Before I could finish, Mrs. Johnson slammed her bag on the desk with a loud noise. A break? Listen here. A president doesn't have breaks. I don't want to be lumped together with irregular employees. You never know where a good opportunity might come up, and I think it's important to show face actively. I wish you'd think a bit before you speak." Mrs. Johnson, in a flurry of words, turned and walked briskly to the exit. The large diamond shining at her neck seemed especially dazzling. As soon as lunch break started, I gobbled down my meal. Ever since the previous president fell, we stopped having leisurely meals. When Mrs. Johnson took over, she became overly focused on performance and sales numbers, adopting a policy of not tolerating maintenance or regression. There were even days she said, "If you have time for a lunch break, go make sales." We used to order takeout and chat about trivial things, but not anymore. Those were precious moments for employee communication, and I feel a deep sense of loss thinking those days are gone. But there's no time for sentimentality. Today, I need to visit our loyal customers and also secure new contracts. If I skip the greetings to our regular clients and businesses with confirmed orders, I could probably do more sales visits. However, having been in this business for many years, I believe personal relationships are paramount. It's enjoyable to work with trusted tailors, selecting and crafting quality traditional clothes together, and our customers feel a sense of security with our established relationships. That's why they buy luxurious clothes from us and choose us for once-in-a-lifetime events like weddings. Though I can't take too much time, I make sure to greet our clients and vendors carefully. At one elderly customer's home, I asked how their grandchild's wedding went. This grandmother had previously chosen and bought her granddaughter's wedding dress with me. She expressed great satisfaction with the dress and the wedding, which was wonderful to hear. When she said she'd like to do the same for another granddaughter's wedding, I was genuinely happy. Because of these visits, I hardly get to do new sales rounds, and of course, haven't secured any new contracts. The clock had already struck 2. I had to head back soon or I'd miss the meeting, so I started back to the office with heavy steps. Welcome back. How did it go? You didn't slack off, so you must have snagged at least one contract, right? Mrs. Johnson said, making me fumble for words. It's rare for her to return early, but her presence is almost suffocating. Seemingly displeased with my reaction, she kicked her desk and raised her voice. Did you achieve nothing at all? You're really a burden to the company. Maybe you should start job hunting. Though, a man in his 40s with no skills isn't in much demand. Angered by Mrs. Johnson's words, I reported my modest success. Well, a customer who previously bought a wedding dress was pleased and said they'd come back to us for another one. Mrs. Johnson snorted in response to my story. And when will they buy? How many dresses? What's the price range? There's ongoing business potential, right? She continued to interrogate and berate me with a cold voice. Listen, you seem to think chit-chat is sales. Sales isn't over until the product is delivered and the invoice is sent. Otherwise, it's not profitable. I don't need your bragging about empty pleasantries. Though I wanted to retort, it was true I haven't secured any new contracts. Determined to land a contract tomorrow and prove her wrong, I started preparing for the upcoming meeting. But as I was stapling the documents, Mrs. Johnson suddenly said something unexpected. Right, I have to leave for an appointment, so let's do the meeting report tomorrow. I couldn't help but ask about the situation as she began getting ready. Wait a minute, I told you that we had a meeting scheduled today. It's urgent to finalize and proceed with orders, so we need you there. Is your appointment that important? Mrs. Johnson made an obviously annoyed face at my question. It's an important dinner. I don't have time to waste on you, so I'm leaving. With that, she swiftly headed towards their exit. Before leaving, Mrs. Johnson turned to me. Don't think your work is done after the meeting. Once you finish ordering, get back out and secure at least one contract. And remember, no overtime pay. Good luck. She left with a loud laugh and light steps. The person came to the meeting, thinking the president would be attending, looked puzzled but eventually understood. In a small-scale company like ours, trust is everything. The previous president always emphasized this to employees and led by example. He was always present at sales and meetings and provided detailed follow-ups after delivery. This had earned us the community's trust over the years, but recently I've felt that trust in our company declining. We managed to secure the usual orders through sincere service. After sending off the business partner, I got ready for more sales visits. I'll be stepping out for a bit. Everyone can leave when it's a good time. Thanks for today. It was already dark, and working hours had long ended. I greeted a few employees and set out for sales calls. The next day, I arrived at work more spirited than ever. Yesterday, during cold calls, I happened to talk with someone interested in renewing their company's uniforms. It wasn't a large company, but the conversation went smoothly, and we figured out that updating their wardrobe within their budget was possible, so I managed to seal the deal right then and there. For now, it's just summer clothes and winter sweaters, and since we're not dealing with a large corporation, the profit won't be substantial. However, if they like our service, there might be opportunities for updating their winter clothes and referrals to other companies. I'm well aware that such connections can lead to new opportunities. Feeling optimistic about reporting this to Mrs. Johnson, I felt light in both mind and body. However, my optimism was quickly shattered. Mrs. Johnson, who arrived a bit late, immediately summoned me. "John, don't we have a report from yesterday's meeting? I want to hear about that and what happened afterwards." "Yes, I'll report now." I walked briskly towards Mrs. Johnson, who seemed tired, holding her forehead. "Are you all right? Do you feel unwell?" she just said to hurry up. There was a smell of alcohol. Apparently, she had been drinking until the early morning and wasn't feeling well. I wondered about her professionalism, showing up to work in such a state. Despite my dismay, I briefly reported about yesterday. "We'll proceed with the orders as usual. There were some negotiations on price, but they understood it will remain unchanged. Also, hold on, did they ask for a discount?" You did push back, saying we want to increase the price, right? Mrs. Johnson glared at me with bloodshot eyes. "No, of course, with the rising costs, we'd like to increase prices, but that's difficult since we're offering the same products as other companies. They wouldn't agree, considering their profit margins." My explanation infuriated Mrs. Johnson. "That's why we're taken advantage of. If you don't show a firm stance, how will we get ahead? Think about our profits first, not the clients." Even as a president, I couldn't agree with Mrs. Johnson's approach. Sure, sometimes tough negotiations are necessary. But business cannot last if it's only about one party's gain. Especially in company-to-company dealings. Arguing would only add fuel to the fire. I continued with my report. "We'll review the pricing. Also, I secured a new contract." Mrs. Johnson's eyes lit up slightly. "Well done. How much profit will it bring?" "We received an order for summer clothes and winter sweaters for a company of a few dozen employees. It's not a huge deal, but it's a start." But Mrs. Johnson's expression turned to one of disappointment. "That's it. And it's not even traditional clothes. You're really useless." I had run around tirelessly, even beyond working hours, only to be met with this response. I reached my limit. "Excuse me, but you don't understand anything about work. It's these connections that bring us business. Your focus on immediate profit is wrong." For the first time, I stood up to my superior. Mrs. Johnson seemed taken aback at first but quickly reverted to her usual arrogant demeanor. "Fine. It seems we're not a good match. You don't need to come in from tomorrow." I had reached my limit too. I couldn't deal with such a president anymore. I responded right then and there. "Understood. I'll resign today. Thank you for everything, even though it was a short time." At that moment, I decided to leave the job I loved so much. I wonder what will happen next. Alone in an empty room, I found myself worrying about my future. I had left my job impulsively, but now I had no place to work. Although I enjoyed my job, my salary was never high, so my savings were slim. Even if I cut down my expenses to the bare minimum, my funds would quickly deplete. Then one day, a familiar name appeared on my cell phone. Mike. Mike was a college friend. We kept in touch and went out for drinks for the first few years after graduation, but in recent years we only exchanged Christmas cards. The unexpected call from my old friend filled me with excitement. "It's been a while. How have you been?" "Really long time. I'm good. You sound upbeat, John." I was excited, but my mood soon changed with what Mike said. "How's work going? Knowing you, I bet you're managing a big team, right?" "Well, it's hard to say, but I'm currently unemployed." Mike, always upbeat, seemed at a loss for words. "Must have been tough. Let's not talk over the phone. How about we catch up over drinks? It's a short notice, but are you free today?" I quickly agreed to Mike's invitation. I was happy to see Mike and also felt the need to talk to someone. We decided on a place and time, meeting up at a bar we used to frequent often. I'm surprised, you clashing with your boss and leaving the company. You always hated conflicts and apologized even if you weren't wrong. Yeah, it was surprising for me too, but the new boss and I just didn't see eye to eye. She didn't understand the field, nor did she care about our clients or partners. Mike just listened to my venting, nodding along. Despite the years apart, I was grateful for a friend I could talk to openly. Were you primarily in sales at your company? I mainly handled sales, but I also worked on the company's website and new products. It was enjoyable, but due to budget constraints, many ideas didn't come to fruition. As I explained, I showed Mike the website I had created on my cell phone. He was impressed. "Did you make this? I thought it was professionally done. It looks as good as outsourced work." The former boss wanted a website that would attract the younger crowd, so I learned everything I could. Traditional clothes are great, but the industry is in decline. We had to shift our perspective, but there were limits given our company's size. Mike leaned in as I talked. "What were your ideas? Tell me everything." Feeling overwhelmed by his interest, I shared my thoughts and unimplemented plans. Regular use of traditional clothes is declining, but there's a rise in special occasions and moments for social media. Plus, considering inbound tourism, focusing on special days rather than everyday use is the way forward. I spoke passionately. Also, I wanted to create more than just clothes, like delivering high-quality leather goods at a slightly lower price than luxury brands. It would make quality products more accessible and profitable. Mike listened, pondering deeply. "Did you hold back because of the initial investment or lack of funds?" That, and the current boss shot down my ideas. She said a traditional clothing store doesn't need to venture into new areas. I could see Mrs. Johnson's point. I too wanted to preserve the traditional aspects of the store as the former boss cherished. But it's tough against the industry's declining trend. I wanted to bring new life to the company, but it wasn't accepted. Mike drained his beer and then made an offer. "John, how about working at my company? I'll pay you a fixed salary equivalent to what you were earning, plus commission on sales. Not a bad deal, right?" His eyes were earnest. I knew Mike had started his own brand and business, but I didn't think he was in a position to hire someone like me. When I inquired, Mike laughed. "You underestimate me. My business is mainly online, and I don't have a physical store, but that's enough these days. It's getting to the point where I can manage with just outsourcing." Then, ensuring no one else could hear, Mike whispered his store's revenue and his personal income to me. I was stunned. He was making in a month what I earned in a year. "Well then, I'm looking forward to it. Let's start from next week." Having decided to work at Mike's company, we agreed to formalize the contract later. I immediately made an impact at Mike's company. I revamped their cumbersome website, making it easier to search for products, which led to a tenfold increase in page views. Moreover, I introduced suits and leather accessories to Mike's company, which had primarily focused on selling t-shirts. The convenience and quality of these new additions were well received, and word-of-mouth referrals began to eclipse t-shirt sales. "Hey, the orders won't stop, and we can keep up with production. Can you do something about it?" Offering good products at affordable prices, plus the brand trust Mike has built up over the years, it's great. I'm really happy to finally do what I couldn't before due to budget constraints. While we were having this conversation, purchase notifications kept popping up on the tablet. Production was almost at its limit, but Mike was scratching the back of his head with a pleased look. "Your previous company really let go of a great talent. It was just a matter of good timing and environment. Anyone could have done what I did." Suddenly, my cell phone rang. Looking at the display, I saw Mrs. Johnson's name. Wondering what she wanted, I anxiously answered the call. "Hello, John, it's a disaster. Can you come back? Can you come back right now? You can, right? Mrs. Johnson sounded more panicked than ever, so I decided to listen to her. What's the matter? Ever since you left, our regular customers say they'll go elsewhere. Our other partners want someone they can communicate with, like you. We can't update the website, and there are constant problems. Can you come back and sort things out? Though I was no longer an employee of her company, I still responded politely. I see. I don't think it's appropriate for me to directly deal with clients, so I'll decline that. But as for the website and system, I'll fix them on my next day off. I didn't hand those over properly, so that's on me. I thought I was compromising, but Mrs. Johnson seemed unsatisfied. What are you talking about? Come back right now. You owe the company after all the help you received. What have you been doing all this time? Are you saying you want to rehire me? I could hear her clicking her tongue on the other end of the line. Don't act all high and mighty. You must be struggling to make ends meet. I can pay you the same salary as before, so don't worry about that. Mike overheard Mrs. Johnson's words and burst out laughing. He gestured for me to say something. Do you know my current salary? I probably earned in a month what you make in a year. My salary at Mike's company would likely exceed my former company's annual revenue in just a few months. Although I had fond memories of my old job, I am enjoying my current work and didn't want to return to work under such a boss. I politely said goodbye to Mrs. Johnson and hung up. Mike's company was so busy with my arrival that we had to partner with external companies and recruit new staff, quickly expanding our operations. Seeing the products I developed being appreciated and shared on social media, I knew joining this company was the right decision. While I was caught up in these busy days, a new secretary informed me of a visitor. Curious, I headed to the reception room, where I found Mrs. Johnson. John, please come back to our company. As soon as she saw me, Mrs. Johnson said hi politely. The once high-handed Mrs. Johnson was nowhere to be seen. What happened? Let's hear it first. I managed to get Mrs. Johnson to sit on the sofa. She looked exhausted, a far cry from her once lively self. Since you left, our customer base keeps shrinking. It's not just individual clients, but our corporate relations are dwindling too. I can't even pay my employees anymore. If things continue like this, I'll have to close the shop. I need your help. I felt sorry for Mrs. Johnson, but it was the result of the seeds she had sown. She neglected communication with people and only pursued the company's profits. Losing their goodwill was inevitable. I'd like to help, but I'm fully committed to my current company. I'm sorry I can't assist you. Mrs. Johnson begged me desperately, as if clutching at straws. Mrs. Johnson, please be strong. Have you done all you can? This is the time to use your feet. Regain trust by meeting people face to face, understanding their needs, and addressing the issues you've neglected. Start with that, and things will surely change. Let's talk after that. Mrs. Johnson wiped her tears and nodded firmly. I was wrong. I'll try to make changes starting now. She stood up, having perhaps realized something important about running a business. However, turning a company around is not an easy task. Despite what I said, I knew it was almost impossible for her to recover at this point. I remembered the face of the previous owner, who had treated me well. I wanted to do something to prevent the company I loved from going bankrupt. But I was fully occupied with my current projects and couldn't think of a way to help. I bit my lip, feeling helpless. Years have passed since I joined Mike's company. As the company grew, we formed relationships with more businesses. John, what do you think about this? I'm sure it would be perfect for an important dinner date. I was impressed by Mrs. Johnson's suggestion. Yes, it's exactly as I envisioned. The fabric is wonderful. The response on social media was good too, so let's place an order with Mrs. Johnson for $500,000. Thank you very much. Since then, Mike's company's performance skyrocketed, leading to the creation of new departments and an increase in employees. I had a hand in producing several hit products, particularly in the suits department. We developed suits incorporating elements of traditional clothing designs and fabrics, which not only appealed to American customers, but also to overseas customers, significantly expanding our market. The challenge was to consistently obtain high-quality fabrics and connect with companies strong in traditional clothing, so I contacted Mrs. Johnson. She not only helped with fabric procurement but also provided user-centric suggestions, resulting in an even better product than initially planned. I really appreciate your help, Mrs. Johnson. You were a lifesaver. As I thanked her, Mrs. Johnson blushed modestly. You taught me something important, John. I was such a pathetic person, trying to maintain dignity in an industry I barely understood. It was a terrible mistake. Now, I hear she has built good relationships with her employees and partners and has regained trust in her community. I am confident Mrs. Johnson's company will continue to thrive. Mike, who used to be all about work, also found an important partner. Today is his wedding. I was as happy for Mike's marriage as if it were my own. Congratulations, you look the best you ever have. Well, it's all thanks to the design. I just hope I'm not outdone by the suit. Laughing about it, we shared a moment of joy. Clothes have the power to enhance everyday life and make a single, special day even more memorable. There's a certain magic in clothing. I am happy to work in a job that handles such a powerful tool. I want to continue working in a role that adds a touch of beauty to someone's everyday life.